I'm Daniel Ruiz, 37, a high school English teacher, and depending on which cousin you ask, a cautionary tale about ambition or a late bloomer with a good heart. The gymnasium smelled like floor polish and nostalgia. My old high school colors, navy and gold, drooped from the rafters like they too had grown tired over the years. Folding chairs were arranged in uneven rows, some already tilting from overuse. A welcome back. Class of 2005 banner hung above a makeshift stage, drooping slightly at the center like it had given up halfway through the reunion planning. People moved around in clusters, those who had stayed in town, those who had never left each other's side. I hadn't seen most of them in over a decade. Still, their voices hadn't changed. Laughter in the same pitch. Jokes recycled like time had never moved. I checked my phone for the third time. No message yet. A woman in a tight maroon dress with a clipboard approached the microphone at the front of the room. Her voice echoed through the gym. Let's get started with our roll call. And of course, our fun little, "Where are they now?" Moments I felt my stomach twist. I knew that voice. Melody Brooks. She'd been senior class president, debate team captain, and one of the few people who never learned how to apologize without sounding like she was doing you a favor. One by one, names were called. A few teachers were present too, clapping politely as old students awkwardly waved and shouted updates. 3 kids and a dog. Still at the bank opened my third dental clinic. I stood near the side bleachers, next to the snack table. The punch was warm. The pretzels were stale. Daniel Ruiz Melody called, peering at the list with mock surprise. Still unmarried. Right. People chuckled. I heard it echo and freeze in my spine. Still unmarried. Like it was a medical condition. Like it was the punchline of a joke I didn't write. I opened my mouth, but before I could even get a breath in, Melody moved on. Next up, Kevin Matsuda, newly engaged and running for city council. Kevin walked up with that same confident stride he used back in football practice. People clapped louder. Someone whistled. "Hey, you okay?" A staff member whispered to me as she refilled the lemonade jug beside me. Her eyes were kind. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Yeah, just didn't expect to be cataloged like that. She smiled, a little embarrassed for both of us. Sometimes people get stuck in the past. They think they're being funny. I nodded and looked away. I wanted to leave, but then the doors creaked open, and everything stopped. In walked a tall woman in a navy silk dress that shimmered under the flickering gym lights. Her hair was pinned up, and in one arm she carried our 2-year-old daughter, Riley, bundled in a cloud of soft lavender. Behind her was my son, Julian, clutching a tiny picture book and looking up at the ceiling in wonder. And beside them, pushing open the door with her other hand, was my wife, Dr. Emilia Ruiz. She wore black heels and an air of effortless calm. Her skin glowed even in this awful fluorescent lighting. She wasn't from this town. She didn't speak with apologies folded into her voice. She walked in like she didn't have to explain anything to anyone. She spotted me across the room and smiled, that gentle, precise smile I still couldn't believe I got to come home to. A hush fell over the room. Melody's clipboard tilted downward. "Is that?" Someone whispered behind me. "Daniel's family," another voice said. A few heads turned, chairs scraped. One of the teachers leaned forward, squinting in recognition. My son Julian ran up to me, holding the book. "Daddy, look." I found the penguin again. I knelt, scooping him up and pressing my forehead to his. "You did?" "Huh, that sneaky penguin." Emilia approached, rested her hand gently on my back, and leaned in for a quiet kiss on the cheek. Someone gasped. Someone dropped a plastic cup. And just like that, the room fell utterly, impossibly silent. My name was no longer a joke. It was a question mark hanging in the air, a correction made with presence, not words. If you've ever been introduced as someone you're not, or if you've had to watch people rewrite your story in public like you weren't standing right there, drop a comment or tell me where you're watching from. And hey, hit like or subscribe if you've ever had to prove yourself in the most unexpected way. Because right in that moment, all I did was stand. The room stared, and I finally felt seen. The silence didn't last long. Whispers rustled through the gym like wind through dry leaves. Someone coughed. Someone else muttered, "Wait, that's his wife." I saw Melody fumble with her clipboard like she'd dropped a contact lens. My daughter Riley clung to Amelia's shoulder, blinking curiously at the crowd, while Julian proudly pointed at the banner overhead, proclaiming, "Look, Daddy." The letters are big. I could have spoken, then offered some sarcastic response, made a public point of it, but I didn't. I didn't need to. Amelia's presence did what no defense of mine ever could. It disrupted the assumptions. And not just about my relationship status, about everything. We found an empty spot at the back where I set Julian down, and Amelia kissed his forehead. Her eyes searched mine gently, quietly. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Better now." That moment lingered in me longer than I expected, not just because of the recognition, but because of what it took to get there. Because 2 years ago, I would have walked out that door. 5 years ago, I wouldn't even have shown up. This wasn't about revenge. It was about recovery from the years I spent trying to justify my life to people who had stopped listening long ago. Emilia knelt beside Riley, adjusting her cardigan. "How did they introduce you?" I exhaled, still unmarried. She looked up slowly, one eyebrow raised, like she was choosing between 10 different types of poetic justice. Then she smiled. "I guess they missed the wedding invitations, and the birth announcements, and the holiday cards." I chuckled. Maybe they didn't get reception in their towers of self-importance. We both laughed. It felt good, like an exhale after holding your breath too long. Julian tugged at my sleeve, demanding juice, and I led him toward the table while the roll call awkwardly continued behind us. As I poured him a cup, a guy I recognized, Marcus, I think, approached with that half grin people wear when they're pretending they didn't ignore you for 10 years. "Dude," he said, "didn't know you had a whole squad now." I nodded, polite but restrained. "Yeah, been married 5 years, 2 kids. Life moves." He leaned in. "She's a doctor." "Yep, internal medicine." "Damn," he said. "That's impressive. Where'd you meet?" I didn't want to go into it. Not with someone who hadn't said 2 words to me during school. Not when it would be reduced to trivia for gossip later. Still, I kept my voice even. "In Chicago. I was teaching summer writing courses at a community center." She volunteered at the clinic down the street. Marcus nodded slowly, then stepped back. "Good for you, man. For real. For real." As though I'd fabricated my entire family just to win some imaginary scoreboard I never signed up for. Behind me, Melody wrapped up the announcements with an awkward, half-hearted joke about how some people bloom later in life, and that's okay too. Her voice trailed into a nervous laugh. I caught her eyes. She looked down. I didn't need an apology. I needed distance. The rest of the evening blurred into fragments: someone showing off their new truck, another person listing their job promotions like a resume on repeat. People clinked plastic glasses over mediocre punch. I kept an arm around Julian most of the time, not just to keep him close, but to stay grounded. At one point, Amelia excused herself to the bathroom with Riley, and I stood alone by the bleachers when Mrs. Conway approached. She had been our literature teacher, now in her 70s, with thinner hair and thicker glasses but the same sharp eyes. "Well," she said softly, It's about time they saw who you really became. I smiled. Still working on it. She chuckled. Aren't we all? She hesitated, then touched my arm. You always had that quiet fire, Daniel. The kind that doesn't explode, it just stays lit. I remember your essays. Thoughtful, messy in the margins, but deeply felt. I never forgot. That surprised me more than anything that evening, that she remembered, that I'd mattered, before I could say anything more. Amelia returned with Riley, who was now wide-eyed and babbling about the paper stars on the wall. We sat together on the bleachers while the crowd began thinning out. Name tags were discarded on tables. The music was now just low jazz, someone's Spotify playlist fading into background noise. And then, slowly, one by one, people came over. An old classmate asked Amelia about her work. Another asked me if I still wrote. A few commented on the kids, their resemblance to me, their calmness, their sweetness. It wasn't flattery, it was curiosity with a shade of humility. I realized, with a quiet kind of awe, that I didn't feel resentment anymore, not even toward Melody. People forget who you are when you don't speak loudly in rooms that reward volume. They mistake stillness for absence, delay for failure, and some only notice the roots once the branches start showing. Before we left, Melody approached. I knew it took something in her to walk over. She was always more polished than vulnerable. Hey, she said, voice lower now, eyes softer. That intro was uncalled for. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to embarrass you. I didn't offer her an escape. You didn't embarrass me. You embarrassed yourself. She nodded slowly. You're right. A pause. Your family's beautiful. They are. We didn't shake hands. We didn't hug. We just stood there in the same space, quietly acknowledging the weight of words. Outside, the air was cool and damp. Julian was asleep on my shoulder, Riley drifting off in Amelia's arms. As we walked to the car, Amelia whispered, You handled that with grace. I shook my head. I handled it with exhaustion. She laughed. That works too. In the rearview mirror, I saw the gym shrink behind us, a faded memory already dissolving into the dark. This wasn't vindication. It was reclamation. If you've ever had to walk back into a room that misnamed you just to remind yourself who you really are, you're not alone. Drop a comment or share where you've had to stand your ground. And if you've ever been underestimated, hit like or subscribe. Because the quiet ones, sometimes they're just waiting for the right moment to be seen. We got home late. The kids had fallen asleep in their car seats, and Amelia carried Riley up to her room while I hoisted Julian, his small limbs limp with exhaustion, over my shoulder. Our house sat at the edge of a quiet cul-de-sac, a modest two-story with a maple tree that turned crimson in the fall and blanketed the yard like some slow, beautiful fire. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. Inside, the scent of lavender from the plug-in diffuser greeted us. A few of Julian's toys were still scattered on the living room rug, and the dinner dishes half done waited in the sink. I laid him down gently on his bed, pulled the navy comforter over him, and kissed his forehead. He stirred a little, then smiled in his sleep. Amelia met me in the hallway, barefoot now, her earrings removed. I'll take care of Riley's bottle, she whispered. I'll lock up, I said. The front door clicked shut behind me as I stepped out onto the porch. The stars were faint, scattered behind a veil of clouds, and the crickets buzzed in slow rhythm with the warm summer air. I sank into the porch chair and let the silence pull at my chest like a thread. I should have felt triumphant, seen, validated. But the truth, I felt tired, not from the night, but from the years that led to it. People think humiliation happens all at once like a spotlight moment, but in reality, it's slow, quiet, It accumulates. For me, it started after college. I came home with a degree in creative writing and no job offers. My parents had hoped I'd go into law or medicine like my cousins. They didn't say they were disappointed. They didn't have to. Their silence filled the room like smoke. At every family event, I was the one they didn't know what to do with. When I waited tables at a diner, they asked if I was between things. When I worked at a nonprofit tutoring underprivileged kids, they called it nice volunteer work. They saw me as a project that hadn't finished yet. I was 28 when I started teaching full-time. My contract barely paid for rent, and I moonlighted writing articles for a local blog. Nobody read them. Not even me. Sometimes. But it was during that bleakness that I met Amelia. We were both volunteering at a weekend program in Chicago's South Side. I was helping teenagers write poetry about their neighborhoods. She was running health screenings with her residency team. The first time we talked, she corrected my bandaging technique on a scraped knee. The second time, we argued over whether Maya Angelou was more impactful as a poet or a memoirist. The third time, she handed me a cup of bad coffee and asked if I wanted to come with her to the community garden. I said yes before she finished the sentence. She wasn't impressed by credentials. She was moved by stories, by people. We dated for a year, quietly. No grand declarations, no social media parades, just walks and questions and two people figuring out how to grow into each other. When I proposed, it was in the living room of her apartment. No ring yet, just a paperback copy of Neruda's love poems with a note tucked inside. Let's write our next chapters together. She cried. We married in a courthouse with 5 guests and a vegan chocolate cake. When we told my family, the response was tepid. A doctor. Huh, they said. Half surprised. Half suspicious. Like I'd tricked her. Or like she didn't know what she was getting into. They didn't come to the wedding. Not one of them. It hurt. Of course it did. But Amelia held my hand through it all. And when we found out we were expecting Julian, I remember her whispering, "You and me were already a family." I clung to that, even when my father stopped returning my calls, even when my sister sent a belated text that read only, "Congrats, I guess." They didn't know Amelia. They didn't ask. So, for a long time, I stopped trying. I buried myself in work, in lesson plans, in bedtime stories and bath time chaos and home-cooked meals that tasted okay if you didn't ask too many questions. Amelia worked long hours at the hospital, sometimes overnight. We tag-teamed life. We built something steady, something real. But still I carried the ache, that deep, adolescent wound of being misunderstood, of being told who you are by people who never asked. That's what the reunion stirred up. Not just the joke, not just Melody's voice calling me still unmarried, but everything beneath it. The echo of all those years where I had to carry my worth quietly. So no, it wasn't triumph I felt when they saw Amelia walk in. It was grief. For the time I spent waiting to be seen. The screen door creaked open behind me. Amelia stepped onto the porch, 2 mugs in her hand. She passed me one and sat in the chair beside me. "Chamomile," she said. I nodded. "Perfect." We sat in silence for a while. She broke it first. "You want to talk about it?" I shook my head. "I just want to sit with it." She reached over, her fingers brushing mine. "You were brilliant tonight." I didn't say anything. Exactly. I smiled. She knew. She always knew. The porch light flickered. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked. I could hear Riley turning in her crib through the baby monitor on the table beside us. I thought about Melody's face, about the forced apology, the clipboard trembling slightly in her hands. It wasn't cruelty. Not really. It was blindness. Willful. Yes, but rooted in a world that only honored visible success. Mine had been quiet, domestic, personal, hard to frame on a slide, but it was success all the same. I glanced at Amelia. Do you think I should have said something on the mic? She tilted her head. Would that have made you feel better? Maybe. Then maybe next time. I nodded. Yeah, next time. We sat there a little longer, our mugs empty, the porch growing colder. Eventually, she stood. Come inside when you're ready. I left the porch light on. And with that, she went back in. Left the door open a crack. I stayed. Just a few minutes more. Because sometimes, healing doesn't come from being applauded. It comes from knowing deep in your chest that you were never the person they said you were. And you don't need to prove anything anymore. Sunday morning came quietly, wrapped in soft golden light leaking through the curtains. The kids had let us sleep longer than usual, an unexpected miracle. Emilia stirred beside me, her hair tangled against the pillow, one arm outstretched toward where Riley had usually wandered in at sunrise. But not today. I slipped out of bed, tiptoed into the hallway, and found both kids curled up together on the couch in the living room, watching some animated forest animals learn a life lesson. Julian looked up and grinned. Daddy, he whispered. The fox said sorry to the owl. I nodded seriously. That's big of him. He nodded back, like he understood the gravity of it. I made breakfast slowly, coffee first, then pancakes in weird shapes. Julian requested a spaceship. Riley wanted a cloud. I did my best. The results were vaguely abstract but received applause from both children. By the time Amelia joined us, wearing her glasses and one of my sweatshirts, the house felt soft again, uncomplicated, still. My mind tugged at something unfinished. After breakfast, while the kids ran outside to destroy dandelions with unearned confidence, Amelia sat across from me at the kitchen table, nursing her coffee. You're thinking about your family again, she said gently. I sighed. Is it that obvious? She nodded. Only because I know the weight you carry. I looked out the window. Julian had Riley by the hand, pointing at something in the grass. Probably a beetle or an imaginary treasure. They never asked. I said, not once. About you. About the kids. It's like they wrote a version of my life they were more comfortable with, and I just wasn't invited to edit it. Amelia reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. You don't have to carry their silence anymore. I swallowed hard. But what if I want them to know? Not for validation, but just to see. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she let the silence sit between us like something sacred. When she finally spoke, it was careful. Then tell them. Not for them. For you. That afternoon, I took out a box I hadn't opened in years. It lived in the back of the hall closet under some blankets, old journals, family letters, photographs, the kind of archive that collects not just dust but emotion. Among the papers was a letter from my father, dated 2017, 4 lines long. Hope you're doing well. Your mother says you're in Chicago still. Let us know if you need anything. No signature, no mention of Amelia, no mention of the engagement I'd sent them a photo of months earlier. That was the last letter I ever got from him. I had responded. A full page. I told him about Amelia, about my students, about the poetry workshops I was running on Saturdays. He never replied. My mother's silence was worse. It came wrapped in politeness, in polite deflection. She sent birthday cards to Julian, no cash, no note, just from Grandma. Never called, never visited. I didn't know how to explain that to my kids yet. I didn't want them to grow up thinking they were unloved. They weren't. They were just unseen by the people who should have looked first. That night, after the kids went to bed, I wrote an email. Subject, in case you were wondering, It wasn't angry. It wasn't dramatic. I told them about the reunion, about Melody's introduction, about how it felt to be reduced to a punchline in front of people who once shared my classrooms and corridors. I told them about Amelia, about how we met, how she held my hand through the labor room and whispered strength into me when I thought I had none left. I told them about Julian's love of dinosaurs and Riley's obsession with clouds, how Julian had asked me once if Grandpa was in the sky like great-grandma and I didn't know what to say. I ended it like this. I don't expect a response. I'm not sending this to blame you. I'm just tired of pretending you don't exist in my life anymore, and more importantly, pretending I don't exist in yours. This is who I am, and this is the family I built. I'm proud of them. I hope one day you'll want to know them too. I didn't hit send right away. I let it sit in drafts while Amelia folded laundry on the couch and watched a documentary with subtitles too fast for me to keep up. Finally, just before midnight, I clicked send, and then I closed the laptop and turned off the light. There was no dramatic music, no burst of relief, just the quiet. That's what healing feels like sometimes. Not closure, just quiet. The next morning, I had a reply. It was from my sister. 3 lines. I heard what happened at the reunion. That's really messed up. Mom said she didn't mean to hurt you by staying away. She just didn't know how to come back in. I stared at the message for a long time. Not an apology, not even a real acknowledgement, but maybe a crack in the door. I typed back, "It's not about coming back in, it's about showing up now." No response. Not that day. Not the day after. Still, something had shifted. I went back to work on Monday, walked into my classroom with that familiar smell of whiteboard markers and industrial carpet. My students, mostly juniors, were doing peer review sessions. I sat at my desk and watched them navigate critique and praise with clumsy grace. One of them, Alina, approached me after class. "Mr. Ruiz," she said, "I saw you in someone's TikTok from the reunion. That was your wife and kids." I nodded. That was us. She beamed. "They look like a movie family." "So cool. You never talk about them." I smiled. Sometimes I forget I'm allowed to. That afternoon, I picked Julian up from school. He ran out of the building with a crayon drawing in his hand. 4 stick figures, one with big curly hair, one with glasses, 2 small ones holding balloons. He held it up to me proudly. "That's us." I showed it to my teacher. Did she like it? She said I have a beautiful family. I blinked hard. "Yeah, buddy," I said. "You really do." We drove home in golden silence. And for once, the story I lived matched the story being told. Not because I explained it, but because I stopped hiding it. By midweek, the email sat unread in my mind more than in my inbox. No reply from my parents. No call. No text. I wasn't surprised. But that didn't stop the old ache from slipping in at odd moments when Riley called out for me during nap time. When Julian ran out of breath describing a school project. When Amelia laughed at one of my dumb puns over dinner. Each joy still held a thread of grief. That's what people don't talk about, how, even when you build something beautiful, the absence of your origin can still echo inside it. But life, as it always does, continued. On Thursday, I had a parent-teacher conference at school. It was one of those long days where the sun seemed to set out of obligation, not passion. I sat across from a couple in their 40s, nodding as they asked about their daughter's reading comprehension. As I handed them her latest essay, the mother paused. "You remind me of someone," she said, squinting. "Did you go to Westfield High?" I blinked. "Class of 2005. Her smile softened. "I was 2 years ahead of you. My brother was in your grade. Marcus Blanchard." Of course. The same Marcus who had slapped me on the back at the reunion, trying to act like a decade of silence was water under the bridge. I remember him, I said politely. He mentioned seeing you. Said you showed up with a stunning wife and beautiful kids. Said you looked proud. I laughed quietly. That's because I am. She smiled again, a little wistfully. That's rare these days. People seem afraid to be proud of their lives if they don't look like everyone else's idea of success. That stuck with me. By Friday, the weather had turned. Rain clung to the windows like fingerprints. Riley had a mild fever, so Amelia stayed home from work, her medical instincts never fully shutting off even during the quietest days. I brought her tea while she sat on the floor next to Riley's crib, reading a picture book aloud in her gentle, deliberate tone. Even sick, Riley reached for the pages, whispering, again, after every finish. Later that night, after both kids were asleep and Amelia had gone to bed early with a migraine, I checked my inbox again. Still no reply. I almost closed my laptop, but something made me scroll back. There, buried between spam and faculty memos, was a new message. From my father. Subject re. In case you were wondering, it was brief. Daniel, your email was a lot to take in. I didn't know how to respond right away. I won't pretend to understand all the decisions you've made or how far apart we've grown. That's on me. I showed your mother the photos you included. Riley and Julian are beautiful. Amelia, too. I'm sorry I didn't show up. For the wedding. For the births. For all of it. I didn't know how to be a part of your life once I realized I'd already missed too much of it. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. If there's still a way back, I'd like to try. Dad, I stared at the screen until it blurred. Not because it healed anything, not because I believed it fixed years of silence, but because it acknowledged something I thought would stay buried forever, that he'd read my words, that he saw my children, that he named my wife. I didn't reply right away. I needed to sit with the words, the same way I had asked them to sit with mine. The following weekend, Amelia had a conference in the city. I volunteered to take the kids to the museum. Julian had been begging to see the dinosaur exhibit again, and Riley would follow him anywhere. It was chaos. Of course. Riley spilled orange juice on the front seat. Julian asked 347 questions before we even made it to the parking garage. I carried one, chased the other, and probably lost a few years off my knees in the process. But I loved every second. As we stood beneath the massive T-Rex skeleton, Julian tugged on my hand. Daddy. Yeah, bud. When I grow up, can I be a daddy like you? I knelt beside him. Like me, how you know? He said, blinking. Like someone who tells stories, and makes pancakes that look like monsters, and knows how to fix sadness. I didn't realize I was crying until he touched my cheek. You already are, I whispered. We left the museum late in the afternoon. The sun slipped behind skyscrapers as we walked toward the car. I loaded the kids into their seats and stood outside for a moment, breathing in the city air, wet concrete, pretzel carts, a whiff of jasmine from someone's perfume. And then my phone buzzed. A text from my sister. Mom wants to FaceTime tomorrow. Are you open to it? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I climbed into the car, looked at both my kids through the rearview mirror, Riley dozing with her head tilted, Julian humming some off-key tune, and smiled. Yes, I thought. Yes, I was open. But not on their terms. Not to earn back something that should have never been withheld, only if it meant stepping into the present. Only if it meant seeing my family not as a surprise or a success story, but as the reality I live in every day. That night, I told Amelia about the message. She listened, as always, with eyes that never rushed. Do you want to call her? She asked. I think I do. Then I'll be right beside you. We sat in bed, both laptops open, the kids asleep across the hall. The email from my father still glowed on my screen, and finally, I began to type. Dad, thank you for writing back. I wasn't sure if you would. I'm not expecting miracles. I'm not angry anymore. But I need this to be honest. No pretending the past didn't happen. If you and Mom want to be in my life now, then you have to meet the version of me that's real, not the one you imagined, not the one you tried to reshape by silence. I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm tired. I'm proud. I'm learning. Come meet that man. We can talk next weekend if you're free. I hit send. No fanfare. No expectation. Just hope. Not the loud, cinematic kind, but the quiet kind that lives in the pauses between what's broken and what might still be mended. The next few days passed in a strange calm, like standing in the eye of a long, personal storm. I didn't know what would come next. But something about sending that reply, the simple act of naming myself without apology, left a weight behind, and a kind of freedom with it. Amelia noticed it first. "You're walking lighter," she said one morning, handing me coffee while Riley smeared yogurt on the high-chair tray like she was painting a masterpiece, like something let go of your spine. "Maybe I finally got tired of dragging ghosts," I said. "Or maybe you remembered you were never carrying them for yourself." She replied. That Sunday, the FaceTime call happened. My mother was the one who dialed in. Her name popped up on the screen around 10:03 a.m., just as Riley was knocking over a tower Julian had been building for 25 uninterrupted minutes. Amelia sat beside me. The kids were playing in the background, their laughter distant enough not to dominate the sound but loud enough to remind anyone watching what this house was full of. I hesitated before answering, then tapped. The screen brightened. There she was, my mother. Hair a little grayer than I remembered, lips thinner, eyes still sharp, but not unkind. She was sitting at the kitchen table in the house I grew up in, the wallpaper behind her unchanged since 1997. "Hi," I said. She nodded. "Hi." It took her a few seconds to speak again. "You look older." "I am older." A small, strained smile. "I suppose we both are." Amelia gave a soft wave. "Good morning." My mother glanced at her, and for the first time in nearly 6 years, said her name aloud. "Emilia, it's nice to see you again." Emilia's expression didn't flinch. "You too." And for a moment, I was just still, watching the three of us suspended in that tiny glowing rectangle, caught between memory and reality. My mother cleared her throat. "Your father is in the garage. He's nervous." I laughed. Not cruelly, just truthfully. "I get that." She looked away, as if something behind the camera could distract her from what she needed to say. "I didn't write because I didn't know what to say. But when your father read me your email, She stopped. "I realized I never saw how alone you must have felt all these years. And I never asked." "You didn't," I said. "I'm sorry." The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting match we'd ever had. Then Julian, oblivious to the weight in the air, came barreling into frame with a cereal box on his head like a crown. "Mommy, Daddy. Look, I'm King Cheerios." My mother's mouth opened into something halfway between shock and wonder. He looked at her curiously. "Who's that?" "That's Grandma," I said carefully. Julian squinted. "Is that the grandma that sent the birthday cards?" My mother blinked. Slowly. "Yes. That's me." Julian beamed. "Cool. I like mail." Then, as quickly as he arrived, he darted back into the next room. Riley followed, dragging a pillow behind her like a cape. My mother looked overwhelmed. She pressed her hand to her chest, then finally whispered, "They're beautiful." I nodded. "They are." Amelia placed a hand on my knee beneath the table. I steadied myself. Would you like to meet them sometime? I asked. In person? She looked at me. Really looked. For the first time since I was a teenager. Only if you want that. I do, I said. But it has to be different this time. I'm not hiding anymore. And I'm not minimizing who I married or the life I built just so you feel comfortable. She nodded slowly. Understood. We ended the call after 15 minutes. No grand promises, no tears, just a simple goodbye and a quiet, tentative. Let's talk again soon, later that afternoon. Amelia and I took the kids to the lake. We packed sandwiches and brought bubble wands and a kite Julian insisted he could fly, even though the wind wasn't cooperating. The lake shimmered under a pale blue sky, and people moved like slow brush strokes across the grass. Fathers with strollers, couples sharing ice cream, teens kicking soccer balls. We sat on a blanket while the kids collected pebbles by the water. You handled that well, Amelia said. I didn't break. I replied. That's new. You never needed to break. You just needed someone who saw all your pieces and didn't try to tape them into someone else. I took her hand, held it tightly. You know, I said after a while, I used to think all this the kids. This life, it wouldn't count unless I could prove it to someone else. But today, watching you on that call, it hit me. The only person who ever needed to know who I was already knew. She looked over, eyes soft. You. Me. I whispered. Julian came running with a rock that looked vaguely like a turtle. Can we keep this only if you promise not to sleep with it again? I said. No promises, he shouted, then sprinted away. We laughed. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to defend my happiness. The next weekend, we got another email, this time from my father. It wasn't long. Amelia, I'd like to say thank you. Not just for loving our son, but for building a home I didn't understand until now. I hope one day you'll allow us to visit. She read it in silence, then handed it to me. I don't trust it yet, she said honestly. I don't either, I replied. But maybe that's not the point anymore. She nodded. Then let's take it slow. We didn't respond right away. Instead, we printed out one of the photos Julian drew us, with lopsided heads and big smiles, and mailed it to them. No note, just the image. A quiet offering, not a surrender. An invitation. We didn't wait for a reply. That Sunday, I grilled burgers on the patio while Julian made up a song about ketchup. Riley clapped. Amelia swayed to the tune, laughing with that full, unself-conscious joy I'd fallen in love with. And I stood there, spatula in hand, realizing something that felt like both an ending and a beginning. I had spent years waiting for a stage, for a mic, for a crowd that would finally applaud. But I'd had my audience all along. A little boy who thought I could fix sadness. A little girl who reached for my voice before sleep. A woman who saw every part of me and stayed. That was the recognition I needed. And tonight, standing in the smoke of my own backyard, I gave it to myself. A month passed, then another. The seasons began their slow shift, and with them, the rhythm of our home adjusted in kind. The back-to-school supplies filled the kitchen table, and Julian took great pride in selecting the coolest dinosaur lunchbox. Even though it was identical to last year's, Riley became obsessed with socks, not wearing them, just hiding them in the strangest places. Amelia's hospital schedule eased slightly, and we started taking walks after dinner again, pushing the stroller while Julian rode ahead on his scooter, narrating imaginary battles between sidewalk cracks and pebbles. In many ways, it felt like nothing had changed. In others, everything had. One afternoon, as I graded papers at the dining table, a manila envelope arrived in the mail. My name written in cursive across the front. No return address. Inside was a photo of my father, holding Julian's drawing. He was standing in their backyard, the same one where I used to rake leaves every fall, and smiling. Not the stiff kind he gave to church directories or awkward holiday portraits, but something small and genuine, like the smile of a man who didn't know how to be different yet had decided to try anyway. There was no note inside, just that photo. I stared at it longer than I should have. My hand trembled slightly, and I set the paper down before I smudged it with the pen still in my fingers. Amelia leaned over from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "Is that him?" I nodded. She walked over, stood behind me, rested her hands on my shoulders. Neither of us said anything for a while. Then she whispered, "You okay?" "I don't know yet." "Fair." I tucked the photo into a drawer, not out of secrecy, but because I wasn't ready for it to be on the fridge. Later that night, Julian found it by accident while hunting for batteries. "Who's this?" he asked. "That's Grandpa," I said softly. "Is he coming here?" "Maybe someday." Julian considered that. "Do we have to clean if he comes?" "Definitely. Then maybe wait till next week." I laughed harder than I expected. The next few weekends passed quietly. No calls, no letters, no big moments. But something had shifted inside me. The silence didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like space. A space I was allowed to fill on my terms. At work, I started volunteering to mentor new teachers, something I'd always avoided, afraid of not seeming established enough. Now, I found myself eager to pass something along, even if it was just the reassurance that showing up every day with care was enough. One afternoon, during a planning period, I opened a new document on my laptop and started writing again. Not lesson plans, not articles, just words that felt like mine. A story about a man who wasn't believed, who wasn't seen. Until one day, he stopped waiting to be understood and started building something from the silence. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. It wasn't brilliant, but it was honest. That night, I read a few paragraphs to Amelia as she folded laundry, pausing to laugh at a sentence I'd written wrong on purpose. "You're writing again," she said with a soft smile. "It's been a while. Feels like I forgot how." "No," she said, reaching for my hand. "You just stopped hearing your own voice. Too many other people trying to speak over it." I closed the laptop and pulled her into a kiss. Just one of those quiet ones that didn't mean anything special, and yet meant everything. One weekend in late September, we took a trip to a pumpkin patch just outside the city. Julian wanted the biggest pumpkin he could carry. Riley picked the tiniest one she could find and called it mine, refusing to let go even during the hayride. While we walked between the rows, Amelia glanced over at me. "I think you should invite them." I didn't need to ask who she meant. "You sure I'm not doing it for them?" she said. "I'm doing it for you, because I see the way you look over your shoulder sometimes, even in the happiest moments, like part of you is still waiting to be interrupted." That hit deeper than I wanted to admit. "I don't want the kids to get hurt." "Then let them see you take a risk. Show them what it looks like to choose courage without certainty." I squeezed her hand. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. No big preamble, no emotional buildup, just a short email. "Mom, Dad, we're carving pumpkins next Saturday. Just the four of us. No big event. But if you'd like to come, we'd welcome you. No expectations. Just an open door." Daniel, I didn't wait for a reply. We bought extra snacks just in case. Cleaned the guest bathroom. Set out 2 folding chairs on the back patio. The morning came with blue skies and crisp air. Julian arranged all the pumpkins on the table like a museum exhibit. Riley drew faces on hers with a marker before we could stop her. The clock ticked past noon, then past 1. At 1:42 p.m., I heard tires on the gravel. Julian jumped to the window. There's a car. Who is it? I walked to the front door and opened it before they knocked. My mother stood there in a navy sweater, holding a container of something that looked suspiciously like store-bought cookies. My father beside her, his hands stuffed in his coat pockets. They both looked smaller than I remembered. Not older, just human. Hi, I said. Hi, my mom replied. She held out the cookies awkwardly. We weren't sure what to bring. These are great, I said, accepting them like they were sacred. A beat passed. Julian peeked around my legs. Are you the ones from the picture? My father crouched down slowly. Yes, I'm your grandpa. Julian tilted his head. Do you know how to carve pumpkins? My dad blinked, then nodded. I used to. Maybe you can remind me how. Julian took his hand. Just like that. I stepped back and let them in. Not into the house, into the moment. Not to erase what had been lost, but to mark what was still possible. And when the first pumpkin lid was lifted and Riley squealed at the yucky guts, I saw my mother laughing. Not politely, not performatively, but like someone who remembered how, and for once, I didn't look over my shoulder. I stayed, right there, present, whole. That day didn't end with a speech or a dramatic embrace. It ended with hands sticky from pumpkin guts, a trail of orange seeds leading from the patio to the kitchen, and Riley asleep on my mother's lap while she gently ran her fingers through my daughter's curls, as if she was trying to memorize the shape of love. I watched from the kitchen, elbow deep in sudsy dishes, listening to the soft hum of a football game drifting from the living room where Julian and my father sat side by side saying very little, sharing apple slices like old friends rediscovering a rhythm. There were no big confessions, no tearful apologies. But there was something else. Something that can't be wrapped in language but lingers in gesture, a second chance that doesn't demand perfection. After they left, Amelia helped me put the kids to bed. Julian mumbled something about Grandpa helping him draw a monster on his pumpkin. Riley reached for her drawing and insisted it sleep next to her on the pillow. Later, in bed, Amelia curled into me and whispered, "You okay?" I stared at the ceiling a long moment before answering. I don't know if I'm okay, but I feel real. She nodded against my chest. Real's enough. The next morning, I found a voicemail from my father. His voice was tentative, like stepping onto ice. Thanks for yesterday. I know we don't deserve it, but I want you to know. I see it now. Your life, your family, you. And it's beautiful. He paused. I'm sorry I didn't have the eyes to see it before. That was it. 6 seconds. But it was more than I'd ever heard from him in the 37 years prior. That week, my students were tasked with writing personal narratives. Most of them groaned when I introduced the assignment until I framed it a little differently. Write about the moment you realized something wasn't what you thought it was. A person, a place, even yourself. A girl named Avery came up to me after class. Can it be about something that's still happening? Yes, I said. Especially that? She nodded, chewing her sleeve. Okay, that helps. Later, I read her draft. It was about her older sister, who left home 2 years ago and hadn't spoken to the family since. Avery wrote about how she used to think the silence meant betrayal, but now she wondered if it meant pain. I left a note in the margin. You're learning to ask questions instead of writing endings. As I wrote the words, I realized I had finally done the same. Another email came a few days later, this time from my mother. Amelia, I'm not proud of how I treated you. You were kind. You gave us chances. I shut them down. I won't pretend it didn't happen, but I would like a chance to know the woman my son calls home. If you're open to it, I'd like to come by sometime. Just us. No big expectations. I'll bring coffee. And questions. M. Amelia read it quietly, then slid the laptop across the table to me. She's trying, she said. And I don't want to be the one who refuses effort. You don't have to protect me from her anymore. I said. I'm not, Amelia replied. I'm protecting what we've built. We agreed on a Sunday morning, after church. I took the kids to the park, and Amelia sat with my mother on the back porch, the same place we had carved pumpkins just a week before. When I came back 2 hours later, they were still sitting there, coffee mugs half empty, a shared blanket over their knees. They looked up. My mother smiled. Not forced, not cautious, warm. Amelia's eyes met mine and gave a tiny nod. Later, when I asked her what they talked about, she said, mostly, your childhood. And mine. She asked more questions than I expected. Did you answer them, most of them? Not because she earned it, but because I could. Halloween came. Julian was a knight. Riley was a rainbow. I was a tired dad with a cardboard sword duct taped to my belt. We trick-or-treated around the neighborhood, then came home to find a small surprise waiting. A shoebox on our porch. Inside a carved pumpkin with family etched gently across the front in uneven lettering, and a small framed photo, my father, holding Riley in one arm and Julian's pumpkin monster in the other. No note, just presents. And for once, that was enough. The year ended without ceremony. A quiet New Year's Eve in our living room. The kids asleep by 9, fireworks thudding in the distance. I sat with Amelia, a blanket over our laps, and whispered the thing I'd been holding all month. I spent so long needing them to accept me, I didn't realize I'd already accepted myself. She turned her face toward mine, and now I don't need their permission to be proud. She kissed my forehead. You never did. Weeks later, I saw Melody Brooks again, at the grocery store, her cart full of frozen meals, a Bluetooth earpiece tucked into her hair, still multitasking her way through life. She saw me, froze, then offered a polite smile. Daniel. Hey. Melody. She gestured toward her cart. You know, I've been meaning to reach out after the reunion. That thing I said, it was out of line. It was, I said evenly. She blinked, surprised I didn't let her off the hook. But I'm not holding it, I added. I'm not carrying anyone else's discomfort anymore. She nodded, then softened. Well, good. You looked good that night. I was, I said. And I still am. I walked away before she could say more. Not in arrogance. In peace. A few days after, Julian brought home a school project, a family tree. He'd filled in all the names he knew me. Emilia, Riley, the grandparents. But there was one little line at the bottom, scrawled in pencil and crooked letters. And me, the branch that keeps growing. I stared at that paper for a long time, because that's what this whole story had become. Not about repair, not about revenge, but about growth. Honest, messy, slow, but real. And sometimes, that's more than enough. By spring, the rhythm of everything felt different. Not louder, not more dramatic, just more settled. The world around us hadn't changed much. The same neighbors still waved from across the street. Amelia still scribbled shopping lists on the back of prescription pads. Julian still argued with the moon about bedtime. But something inside me had shifted. I no longer braced myself before opening emails from my family. I no longer rehearsed explanations for who I was, what I'd built, or why I didn't need to be fixed. I had stopped living like an apology waiting to be delivered. That's not to say the past disappeared. It never does. But its grip, that loosened one afternoon. While helping Julian build a cardboard city in the garage, I found a rusted metal box wedged behind a shelf. I recognized it instantly. My high school keepsake box. I hadn't seen it since I moved out at 22. I opened it with hesitant hands, dust rising like breath held too long. Inside were folded notes passed in class, old ticket stubs, a photo of my senior yearbook group, and a cassette labeled Daniel's Mix Spring 2005. I turned it over and laughed. On the back was a note in my own handwriting, for when I become someone. I sat cross-legged on the garage floor, cassette in hand, stunned by my younger self's sincerity. I wanted to reach back in time and whisper, "You already were someone. You just hadn't met him yet." Julian sat beside me, peeking over my shoulder. "What's that A mixtape?" "Like a playlist, kind of. Only older. Slower. You had to wait for the music." He looked confused. "Why would anyone wait?" I smiled, because it made the song feel like a gift. He considered that for a second. Then, "Can we listen to it?" I didn't have a cassette player anymore. But later that night, I found most of the songs online and made a new playlist. I named it the same thing. Daniel's Mix Spring 2005. Track 1 was a soft indie song I hadn't heard in nearly 2 decades. It played through my laptop speakers while I sat on the porch that evening, wrapped in a hoodie, watching the sun stretch itself over our neighborhood one last time before tucking behind the trees. Emilia joined me halfway through the second song, barefoot, holding 2 mugs of herbal tea. "What's this?" she asked. A letter from a younger version of me. She listened for a while, then nodded. He had taste. I think he was hopeful. "You still are?" I laughed softly. "Yeah, but now it's earned." She leaned into me. "Do you think they know now you're family? That I'm happy?" She shook her head. "That you always were worthy. Even before all this." I exhaled. "I think they're beginning to." A few days later, my mother asked if she could come over again. This time, not for coffee, just to spend the afternoon. She arrived with a bag of hand-me-down books she used to read to me when I was Julian's age. She had even written a note on the inside cover of one for my grandson, whose father once asked every question twice. We sat in the living room while Julian asked her what everything in the house was. Riley pulled books off the shelf just to hear the sound of them falling. My mother laughed. She laughed easily now, like someone discovering her own breath again. "Do you want to read to them?" I asked her gently. She hesitated, then took the book, sat on the rug, opened the pages with trembling hands. She read, and the kids listened, and I watched. Not like an outsider, not like a son still waiting for permission, but like a man who had come home to the life he chose. In April, the school hosted a storytelling night. Staff were invited to read something personal. I'd skipped it every year since I'd been hired, but this time, I said yes. I didn't write anything new. I read from an old journal entry, written the day Julian was born. The handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged, but the words were still true. He came into the world pink and furious and loud, and yet, when they placed him in my arms, he looked at me like he'd been waiting for me all along. No judgment, no fear, just trust. I want to be someone who deserves that trust. When I looked up, the room was still. One of the younger teachers had tears in her eyes. Another clapped with both hands pressed to her chest. And in the back row, unnoticed until now, stood my father. He didn't wave, didn't approach, just stood, hands in his pockets, nodding once just enough for me to know he heard me. I didn't need more than that, because in that moment, something inside me settled. Not closure, not completion, but peace. The last time I visited my childhood home was on Mother's Day. The house looked smaller, As all remembered things do, I brought the kids, and we sat in the backyard. My father grilled. My mother showed Riley how to press flowers into an old scrapbook. Julian explored the garage, looking for treasure. After dinner, my father pulled out an old photo album, one I hadn't seen in years. There we were, me, 10 years old, holding a science fair ribbon, my dad behind me, one hand on my shoulder. I remembered that day, how proud I was, how quiet he was. He pointed to the photo and said, "I wish I'd told you then that I was proud, that you didn't have to be anything else to earn it." I nodded. I know. I wish I'd heard it. But I know now. He turned the page, and we moved forward. This isn't the kind of story that ends with fireworks. It ends in the slow unfolding of things once folded tightly: arms, hearts, expectations. It ends in a kitchen full of half-cleaned dishes, with laughter in the next room and soft music playing over a playlist made by a boy who once waited to become someone. It ends in quiet, in dignity, in presence, not in being introduced correctly or having your worth finally declared by others, but in knowing that you showed up anyway, that you stood where they said you didn't belong. And when your wife and children walked into that room, they didn't complete you, they reflected you, and the world had no choice but to see.